Everything that was happening now, all the chaos, the instability, the strange events that had started to unfold, it wasn't a coincidence. It was by design. A design that Ilias had orchestrated long ago. And now, the clock was ticking. But what was his endgame? Why leave behind a city on the verge of collapse? Was this his ultimate revenge? Or was he trying to send a message to the people who had once dismissed him as nothing more than an eccentric historian? No one knew. But one thing was certain. Ilias had unlocked a Pandora's box. And as the days passed, the city slowly began to unravel in ways no one could have predicted. The people, blissfully unaware of the danger, continued to go about their lives, unaware that the very ground beneath them was shaking, preparing to swallow them whole. The recipe for the city's destruction had already begun to unfold, and Ilias was the only one who could stop it, if he even wanted to. But could anyone find him before it was too late? The world was watching. The clock was ticking. And the only person who held the answers was a man who had long ago disappeared into the shadows, leaving only a trail of destruction in his wake. The night was unnaturally quiet. A thick fog had settled over the city, wrapping the streets in an eerie stillness. Streetlights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows on the pavement. The few people who dared to be outside moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the emptiness. It was as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. In a dimly lit apartment on the outskirts of town, an old man sat hunched over a cluttered desk. His gnarled fingers traced over faded pages of an ancient notebook, the paper yellowed with time. His name was Ilias Grayson, a man who had spent decades hiding from the world. He was the only one who knew the truth, the only one who knew the recipe that could bring an entire city to its knees. And tonight, he wasn't sure if he could keep that secret any longer. Far away in the heart of the city, Detective Marcus Hale stood by the window of his small office, staring at the skyline. Something felt off. He had spent years solving cases, unraveling mysteries that seemed impossible. But this time, he had no leads, only a growing sense of unease. There had been strange occurrences lately. People disappearing without a trace, odd symbols appearing on abandoned buildings. And the most chilling of all, the whispers about a recipe that could end it all. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. He had heard rumors about Ilias Grayson before, a reclusive figure from a forgotten past. Some said he was a genius chemist. Others claimed he was a madman. But one thing was certain. If there was any truth to the legend, then Ilias was the key to everything. And if the wrong people found him first, the city was doomed. Meanwhile, in the shadows of an alleyway, a man in a dark suit lit a cigarette, his face barely visible in the dim glow of the flame. He had been watching Ilias for weeks, tracking his every move. He knew that the old man was close to cracking under the weight of his own knowledge. And when that happened, he would be there to collect the prize. The city would never see it coming. Elias stared at the notebook, his breath shallow. He could feel the walls closing in around him. He had spent years running from this moment, but deep down, he always knew it would come. The recipe was never meant to be used. It was never meant to exist. But now, he had no choice. Someone had been following him. Someone who wanted the knowledge buried in these pages. And if they got it, there would be no turning back. Marcus grabbed his coat and headed for the door. He had a gut feeling he couldn't ignore. He needed to find Ilias before it was too late. As he stepped into the cold night air, he felt the weight of the city pressing down on him. Somewhere out there, a secret was waiting to be uncovered. A secret that could destroy everything. And the clock was already ticking. The streets were nearly deserted as Marcus made his way through the city. He knew exactly where to start his search. A former informant, a man who had once worked for the underground networks that dealt in dangerous secrets, had mentioned Ilias's name in hushed tones a few weeks ago. At the time, Marcus hadn't paid much attention, but now everything was beginning to line up. He quickened his pace, weaving through the empty sidewalks and dimly lit alleyways. Elias, meanwhile, shut the notebook and exhaled deeply. The weight of the secret was becoming unbearable. He had thought about destroying it many times before, but something had always stopped him. Maybe it was the fear that even if he did, the knowledge would never truly be erased. Or maybe it was the thought that one day, it might be needed to prevent something worse. But now, as he sensed the walls closing in, he wondered if he had waited too long. He glanced toward the window. The street outside was empty, but he could feel it. He was being watched. The man in the dark suit, standing in the shadows a few buildings away, smirked as he exhaled smoke into the air. He had seen Elias move to the window. The old man was growing restless, and that meant he was getting closer to making a mistake. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, pressing a button to send a silent signal. Within seconds, a car parked nearby flashed its lights, once before fading back into the darkness. Everything was in place. It was only a matter of time now. Marcus finally reached his destination, a small, rundown bar at the edge of the city. He pushed open the heavy door and stepped inside. The air was thick with smoke and the faint scent of alcohol. The bartender barely glanced at him before turning back to clean a glass. Marcus scanned the room until his eyes settled on a familiar face in the corner booth. The informant, a wiry man with a nervous expression, shifted uncomfortably as Marcus approached. "I need to know about Elias Grayson," Marcus said, his voice low but firm. The man hesitated, glancing around as if expecting someone to be listening. "You don't want to get involved with that name," he muttered. "People who go looking for him, they don't always come back." Marcus leaned in closer. "I don't have time for warnings. Just tell me what you know." The informant sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. He's been hiding for years, but lately, something's changed. Word is, someone's after him. Someone serious. If they find him, it's over. Not just for him, for the whole city. A chill ran down Marcus's spine. "Who's after him?" The man shook his head. "No one knows for sure. But they've got resources. They've got power. And they're getting closer." Elias paced in his apartment, his hands trembling. He had made a decision. He couldn't keep running, couldn't keep pretending he was safe. He reached for the notebook once more, flipping to the last page. There, scrawled in ink that had long since faded, were the final ingredients, the final steps. The one thing that could end everything. His breath hitched as he realized what he had to do. He needed to disappear, tonight. Outside, the man in the dark suit nodded toward the car. It was time. He stepped out of the shadows and crossed the street, heading straight for Elias's door. He knocked once, then twice. Silence. Then the sound of movement inside. A slow smile crept across his face. Inside, Elias froze. His heart pounded as he stared at the door. It was too late. They had found him. And the city's fate was now hanging by a thread. Marcus pulled out his phone, dialing a number he hadn't used in years. A deep voice answered on the other end. This better be important. Marcus took a breath. I need backup. Now. He hung up before he could get a response and rushed toward the only place he knew Elias could be. But was he already too late?